let's get to designing the banner. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new file. And I always start off with this preset. It can be found over in Film and Video, and it's the HDTV 1080p. And the reason why I like this is because it comes with the guide markings for your action safe and title safe. So just like what John was saying in his presentation, this kind of gives you a good gauge of where everything needs to be. So my first step in designing anything is to kind of look and see, what the theme is, what I'm trying to go, and get my head in the right place to do the design. So what we're going to be creating is this image right here. So this is a fake banner for the Light Up America event, and so this is kind of what we're going to end up at. And so when we're thinking of, or at least when I'm thinking of America, the first thing I kind of think of is, American flag, Statue of Liberty. And so this is where I started off with. So I went to Unsplash and I found a nice image of the Statue of Liberty. So I'm going to import this into my Photoshop document by just dragging and dropping it onto my canvas. You're going to notice this image is not properly sized, but that's not a huge deal. I'm just going to resize this, and I'm going to hold down the Alt key while I do that to scale it from the center. That way, it will scale directly from the center, and the image stays centered in the frame.
And what it also does is it preserves the aspect ratio as well,
yes,
so that you don't squish or squash your image and come up with things that look distorted.
Yes, good catch. I'm now going to just bring the image up so that the base of the statue lines up with the bottom of the frame. That puts the Lady Liberty kind of right in the center. I think this is a good, kind of a good starting point. I'm just going to label this Statue of Liberty, and then we're good to go. So the next thing I'm going to do is drag on my American flag, and I can't remember which of these I used in the actual design. I think it was this one, but this is the one that we're going to go with for our American flag. And what I'm going to do now is kind of figure out where I want to put this American flag. Going to scale this guy up and just going to zoom out, scale this up a little bit, and maybe right around here. Yeah, I like this better. So I'm just going to play around with the placement of where I want this American flag until I like it. And I am purposefully having it take up like a large portion of the other side of the screen. And so now what I'm going to do is, after labeling this, we're going to now mess around with blend modes, and then we're going to use one of my favorite tools, which is a layer mask. So we're going to start with the layer mask because it'll be easier to see what we are doing while this is fully visible.
And real quick, to explain what a mask is it sounds kind of exactly what you guys are thinking. If you were to, like, because it's Halloween, you put a mask over your face. The mask is visible, your face is not. So when Tyler puts a mask on here, what is black will be hidden, and what is white in the mask will be shown.
Yep.
You can always invert that as well, but that's essentially what a mask does.
Yep. So I'm going to create a new layer mask by selecting my layer, and then down at the bottom where there's this little square with a circle cut out, That is the layer mask button, and we're going to create a new layer mask. Now, next to your layer, you're gonna see a little white thumbnail, and I'm gonna select that. Now what I'm gonna do is grab my paintbrush tool, which is over here. I can use the hotkey B to select that. And now I'm going to create a rather large paintbrush. You can change the size of your paintbrush by right-clicking on the canvas. And I want the hardness to be at 0. And this is really important for what we're going to do, because we're going to use this mask to feather the edge of our flag. So now, if I start painting, we can see that our flag is now disappearing because I am painting black on this mask. And if I switch to white and I start painting again, it's going to reappear. So I'm going to just kind of mask away a little bit of this. I'm going to go back and forth here until I get something that I kind of like. And to further feather this, what I'm going to do is adjust a little bit of how this brush works. So I'm going to go up here to the top, and I'm going to turn the flow of this brush down. What this is essentially doing is making it so that every time I click, the brush is putting out less paint than what it typically would. So it's not fully opaque, what I'm doing. So it would take multiple passes to get something completely gone. And I think something like this, where we're at, this is looking okay. The big thing I'm looking for is I don't want any hard edges around this flag. And I think with where this is right now, this looks fine. So now that I am done with my mask, the next thing I'm going to do is mess with the blend mode. And the blend mode just changes how the colors of the image interact or blend with all of the layers beneath it. So a very popular blend mode is the multiply. And this will basically only show things that are darker than the image beneath it. All of these that are in the darken section are going to look darker. All of these in the lighten section are going to look brighter. The screen blend mode's another popular one. It only shows things that are lighter than the image behind it. But the one I'm going to use today is this overlay. And it just kind of nicely overlays the image on top of the other. So now you can see, normal, this flag is 100% opaque. It's blocking our image behind it. But when I put it in this overlay, now it kind of nicely superimposes the image on top of our background. And it makes it look a lot more like a cohesive unit.
And it's just a different way to do this than what you guys might typically see people do, which is just to mess with the opacity. Because
Yes.
all the opacity is going to do is turn off a percentage of the entire image as a compressed thing. And the blending modes allow you to target individual colors.
Yeah.
So it's just a different way.
Yeah. So you can see what this looks like if I just turn the opacity down. I mean, it still looks okay. It just doesn't look nearly as good, in my opinion, as now the colors are interacting with one another. So it helps kind of marry the two images together, which anytime you're doing kind of a photo manipulation, you want it to, have that cohesive look. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is group all of this together, and I'm just going to label this BG for background. Now, another tool that I really like to use are adjustment layers. I like, especially when I'm manipulating two photos, I really like to make sure that I am kind of affecting the colors of the image to, again, further marry these two images together and make them look good. So we're going to do a bit of color mapping here. We're going to start off with kind of a manual pass, and I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger. Okay, maybe not that big. This is good enough. And I'm going to put a red color in my foreground and a blue color in my background. If you need to do that for yourself, just turn your flag back to the normal blend mode, and then go to your eyedropper tool, which is right here, and you can select like this blue and this red and put that in your foreground and your background. So if you select that and then switch your color over here and select that red, you should be good to go. I want a little bit brighter of a blue, so, but I'm going to go back to the colors I had, and I'm going to set this back to overlay. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is just with my brush, I'm going to completely cover up my image with, actually, I want the blue on top. So I'm going to use the X key to switch from my background color to foreground. And I'm going to just come in and I'm going to paint like half of this just completely blue. And then I'm going to use the X key again to switch my foreground and background color. And I'm going to paint this half of the image red. And I'm going to kind of blend them like this. So I've completely covered up my image, but now using the different blend modes, I am going to adjust essentially how these colors all interact with one another. So I'm going to use the soft light blend mode. This kind of makes the color that you're overlaying act like a soft light. So it's looking more like a lighting effect. And you can see just this one blend mode or this one blend layer is really affecting how the colors interact, and it's making this look pretty nice. I'm now just going to turn the opacity of that down a little bit so it's not quite as obvious. Anytime you're manipulating the colors of your image, you want to make sure to not overdo it. So I think this looks good. And now I'm going to use another tool called an adjustment layer. And the way we will add an adjustment layer is by clicking this little half circle. And this will allow us to add an adjustment layer. And we're going to use a gradient map adjustment layer. Now, what a gradient map is doing is basically remapping all of the colors in your image to fit a colors along a gradient. So we have this gradient here, and you'll now see all of our image follows these two colors. So I have got a couple of gradient maps that I really like. And in your presets, you should see this purples folder. I like this second one, purple 2. And you can see it's making the image look a little weird, right? But we're going to reverse this so it looks a little bit more normal, but this is really bright, and you might be wondering how in the world is this going to make our image look better. But when we adjust the blend mode and we put it on this soft light blend mode, now this is the original image. This is with that gradient map. It's just kind of brightening the image, and it's further accentuating the colors, just kind of giving it a little bit more vibrance. I'm going to turn that down just a little. And the last thing I'm wanting to do to this image, I've brightened it up, but I also want to add a little bit of like warmth and earthiness to this. So I'm going to add another gradient map on top of this again. And this one, I believe, is in the trying to remember where this is. Yeah, it's in the grays section. And again, sometimes these gradient maps, they need to be reversed in order for them to look properly. Actually, this is the wrong one. I think it was... I think it was this one, actually. This one. This is it. Purple 23. And we are going to reverse this again so that the gradients, the darkest portions of the image are replaced by the darker color and the lighter ones as well. So, and then again, soft light blend mode. Adjust the opacity to bring it down. And we can see what this is doing. It's kind of brightening the image, but it's also bringing out a little bit more of the earthier tones because of it having more of the tan and the dark brown, or the darker purple. So I'm going to group these together, and I'm going to call this color mapping. So we can see without color mapping, this is what our image looked like. With, this is what it looks like. It's just by manipulating these colors, now it kind of makes this feel a little more like a cohesive unit. Looks like these images were meant to be together. And it's just kind of adding a little bit more life to the image by editing it. All right. Last step, or I guess not quite, but the next step is we're going to add our text. So I'm going to go back to a default color of just black and white, and I'm going to put white text in the foreground. I'm going to go to the type tool, and I am going to start working on my text. So the first thing I'm going to do is I want to split my text up into different layers so that I can kind of manipulate the typography of the image. I can have everything kind of line up and look nice. So I have light up as my first. And now I'm going to add in American. And here I just try to think of ways that I can creatively convey this text. America to me is the big focus of this event. And so I want to make this a little bit bolder. So I'm going to put this in like maybe an extra bold version of Montserrat. This is one of the reasons why I really like Montserrat as a font family, because it has a lot of different font weights that you can use. So it's got, this extra bold weight, but it also has lighter weights that you can use. So you can use fonts of the same family, but they look different because they're weighted differently. So you don't have to worry about your fonts not looking cohesive or being complementary to one another, because it's the same font, it's just weighted a little differently. It's thicker or smaller. Now I think I like this placement here. It's right along this safe margin. And I think this overall is going to work as far as size, just kind of messing around with it. But now I'm going to mess with light up, because I think light up is maybe a little too light as far as the font weight goes. So I'm going to see what it looks like, maybe going to a medium or semi-bold. And I think medium is looking good to me. Let's see what I did in the original. Yeah, that looks pretty medium, we'll say. And now what I'm going to do is size this up. A simple way, like a simple typography trick, is to just create a square block for your text. So everything in this, if I were to draw a rectangle, like this just creates a nice little rectangle of text. It all fits within this nice rectangular shape. It's a really simple way to do typography is just to keep it in that rectangular shape. I think actually I am going to stick with the regular, now seeing this up to size. So I am going back to the regular size. Now you're going to notice this is not the easiest thing to read because I've got light text on a light background. We're going to correct that here in a second. But for now, this is looking good. And so the next thing is I need to put in my times. So for these, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to get my type tool and I'm going to type out my date and time information. And then I'm going to separate it with just a vertical line there. And this is going from 1900 to 0 Eastern time. And again, I'm sticking with this idea of kind of a square or a rectangle. So I'm going to use my transform tool as Control T or Command T if you're on a Mac. And I'm going to resize this so that it fits in this little rectangle. It fits in my margins.
And if you guys can notice, when Tyler is moving around his text, sometimes you're seeing these little pink lines show up. I don't know, Tyler, if you can kind of move the June around a little bit, and you see these little pink lines. These are automatic guides that Photoshop will give you to help you make these typography boxes, to help you stay within line. It's built into the AI, if you will, to help make sure that you are within that, because this concept of keeping the left edges all lined up and the right edges all lined up is kind of a industry standard for when we're putting font on a graphic.
Yep. And if you're not seeing those in your Photoshop, if you go up to View and go down to, let's see, Show, you want to make sure that you have Smart Guides selected, and then you will see the Smart Guides. Likewise, if they're getting in your way and you want to get rid of them, that's also how you turn those off. They're a really nice tool, although sometimes they do get a little annoying. But you'll see here, they're actually telling me the perfect distance to put these texts from one another. This is something really important when you're laying out text is balanced negative space is like the technical term. Basically, there is a gap here between these two type elements. If I draw a perfect square here, this is the gap between these two elements. This gap should be the same on the bottom between these two pieces of text. So when you look at this, this looks nice and balanced. But if I take this bottom piece and I shift it all the way down here, now all of a sudden this feels out of whack. Your eye does not like this. Likewise, if I put this too tight, now it feels cramped. So I'm keeping it balanced by making sure that the distance between all of my type elements is the same.
And for those wondering, this is called leading. If you've ever seen LEADING on a graphic design software, it's not leading, it's leading, and I can explain what leading is after the class. It's kind of a cool little factoid for your next bar trivia night.
Yep. And if your smart guides are not, sometimes they don't point out the proper pixel distance, and that's okay. You can use this trick that I'm using right here. Just open up your rectangle tool, hold down the shift key, and just draw you a perfect square that goes between the two images. And then you can use this square as kind of your reference. Before smart guides were as good as they are, this is kind of how you had to do it.
Old school way.
Old school, yep. Okay, so then the other thing that I wanted to add in this image was just something to break up this text, something to kind of separate the bottom text from the top. And so to do that, I used, ironically, the rectangle tool. And I just set the fill up here in the top left to white. If you don't have a recently used white, you can just click the color palette in the top right, drag it up to white. And I just created a small rectangle that is about the same length as everything. And it was decently thin, maybe something like this. And I placed it kind of roughly in the middle. Now, this is where that idea of kind of keeping our negative space balanced, the leading between these two, or the spacing between these two, is perfectly balanced. It's the same thing. And so what I'm going to do is put this rectangle, I'm going to get it as close to perfectly in the center of those. That way it still feels balanced and it doesn't really make this feel cramped. So now we can see we've got our top. That's just in a nice rectangle. Everything fits within like a nice rectangle, and it feels all nice and balanced. Now, I need to start moving this around to figure out exactly where I want to put this in the image. Before I do that, I'm going to group all of my text together, and I'm going to just name this title. And the reason why I do that...
Just tell them how you made that group real fast.
Yeah, let me go back. Select everything, so I'm just selecting the top and then shift clicking to select all of these different layers. And I'm using the Control G hotkey, but you can also just click this folder down in the bottom right. And now I have my title group. And what's nice about this is now that they're grouped together, I can move these all around as one object. I don't have to have them all selected. I can just have them as one object. I think that where I want this is just perfectly in the center of my image. So a quick way to do this is I'll need to create a new blank layer by just going down in the bottom right and clicking new layer. And I'm going to bring this layer to the bottom. And I'm going to select my title. And then I'm going to hold down the Control key or the Command key if you're on Mac. And I'm going to select that bottom layer. And now I'm going to use my alignment guides up here at the top. So I'm going to find this one that aligns the vertical centers of the two layers. And it did not do anything. There we go. So how I fixed that, this new layer that I created needed something in it. So all I did to show you guys, create the new layer. If you hold down the Alt key and backspace, it will just fill the layer with your foreground color. So that's all I did. And you're not going to see it because it's at the very bottom. But when I do the Control click and align the vertical centers, now this group is perfectly in the center of this image. The reason why I used an additional layer to do this rather than trying to align it with one of these groups is sometimes Photoshop will move both layers. So it might move this background up and move the title down to kind of split the difference. I didn't want it to do that because I liked where my background was at. So I created a new layer that I don't really care what happens to this. If this layer gets moved, I don't care. It's not important. I want these to stay in place. So I just kind of created this as a guide layer. So if it did get moved, then, I can just move it back and it's not that big a deal. So now let's address the issue of not really being able to read the text. All right. So we have our nice typography, we have everything grouped together, and this is another benefit of having all of your text or all of your titles in a group, is now we can apply layer styles to these all at once. So to open up the layer style window, there's several ways to do this. You can just double click on the right hand side of the layer, or you can hit the effects and go to blending options, or I believe you can also right click and go to blending options. One thing you'll learn about Adobe products is there's about 3 different ways to do everything.
Yep.
So I like the double click method because it's quicker. And these are all the different blending options and styles that we can kind of layer styles we can apply. And the one that I'm going to use is the good old fashioned drop shadow. Drop shadow is a great way to create distance or create separation from a foreground and a background element. And it really helps distinguish the text from the rest of the image. Because again, we want our text to be readable. It's the most important thing about this banner is the name of the event, when it's happening, what it's featuring, etc. So to get my drop shadow set, I'm going to set the opacity to 100%. And then I'm just going to fiddle with the settings, find what I like. Okay. So I want maybe a little bit of distance. The distance is how far away from the source layer the drop shadow is. I want maybe a little bit of distance. The spread is how far the drop shadow spreads out. Basically like how, if you see here, it's essentially how thick the drop shadow is before it starts to die off. And then the size is essentially like how much your shadow disperses. So typically I like a little bit of spread, relatively high size, maybe around like 20 or so, and then just a little bit of distance. So the spread kind of helps further distinguish the text, kind of creates a nice little outline by it. And then the size is going to give us that, it's just going to give us that kind of blurriness of the shadow. And I like the way this is looking here. So the distance is 8 pixels, spread is 5%, the size is 38 pixels. And then the opacity, I'm just going to bring it down slightly, maybe about 50% opacity. And then we're going to call it good there. I'm going to hide these safe layers because I'm don't really need them right now. So I'm going to hit Control H to hide those. And I just want to get a sense of what this thing is looking like at this point. If you want to see what it looks like without your drop shadow, you can click the little eye next to your effect so we can see before and after. Our text is now a lot more readable. Okay. Last thing that we're going to do is we are going to add our logos. And then we're done. So the VATUSA logo, you guys can get from the VATUSA website. And I use...
It also should be in the drop shot, the Google Drive. It's in there.
Okay. It should be in your Google Drive as well. So we're going to drag in the VATUSA logo. And for now, I'm just going to put that right there. And then also the VATSIM logo. Let's see, VATSIM logo. And I used this one. Logo, no tagline. All right. So the first thing I want to do is kind of figure out where these are going to go. And I can use this title safe layer or these guides as a good starting point. So what I'm going to do is make sure that the bottom of this lines up pretty much perfectly with this title safe line. And I'm just going to nudge this layer by using my arrow keys. And notice I'm aligning the text, not the VATUSA star. It's just because the text has an easier line to follow, essentially. Now I feel like this logo is a little bit too big, so I'm going to size it down a little bit by Control T, opening my transform. I'm just going to scale it down a little, maybe about right there. And notice I'm keeping this proportional. I am not messing with the proportions. Anytime you're rescaling a logo, you want to make sure you keep it proportional. And now I'm just going to nudge this back into position here. And I actually think that where these title safe lines are, I think this actually makes a really good, in this case, a really good kind of size for our text. So I'm actually just going to resize this so that my text takes up this whole blank spot right here. That's kind of a happy accident. That's not really intentional, but it works. So then I'm going to do the same thing for the VATSIM logo. I'm going to put it down in the bottom left corner here. And I am going to resize this so that it also fits perfectly within this box. And pretty close. And just to make sure that the logos are centered, what I'm going to do is use my alignment guides up here again. I'm going to shift click so that I can select both of these logos. And I'm going to come up here and do the vertically aligned centers. And you can see it kind of shifted them a little bit, and that's okay. Now what I'm going to do is just, with both of them still selected, I'm going to nudge them back up to this area. And you'll see the VATSIM logo, in this case, because it has these dots, it looks like it's a little higher. I'm going to look and see what this looks like without. And honestly, I feel like I liked it better the way that it was. So I'm going to move this VATSIM logo down back to being perfectly in here. Because since these elements kind of extend above the text, it changes where the vertical center of the logo is. I want the text to be centered. I don't really care about all of these extra elements because the eye is going to see the text. It's not really going to care that the star is a little bit bigger or that these lines are a little bit bigger. And from there, we're pretty much done. We're not going to apply any like color mapping or blend modes to the logos because we want to keep those nice and pure. We don't want to mess with the branding of, companies or our text or whatever. I am gonna increase the opacity of this blue red layer just to darken the image up a little bit, make it look more like the original. But at this point, if you have followed along, we pretty much have the finished product.
And guys, the main thing here is simplicity. Like, if anyone's ever heard "keep it simple, stupid," that's kind of a mantra in design world. Is the simpler your design, the better. It's a lot of fun to throw everything you have at a Photoshop document, to throw thousands and thousands of elements and layers in there, and sometimes they work. Sometimes they pull off and you get something really cool, unique. But sometimes, I mean, how many layers is this? This is essentially not even 10.
We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11.
11.
11 layers.
And some of them were gradients, which is just coloring.
Yep.
That's the beauty of it is it's simple, it's clean, and it's easy to read, and it took us 30 minutes.
Yep.
One thing that I had experience, but
yep. One thing that I did do differently looking at the original image, I did kind of do some trickery with this line here that I can show you guys.
Yeah, you kind of feathered the edge off a
Yeah.
little bit.
So the way to do that, just like what we did with the flag, I just add a layer mask to my rectangle. And this time I'm going to go with a much smaller brush. And I'm going to do the same thing where I turn the flow down. And then I'm just going to draw black over the edge here to kind of feather the edge a bit. And then I even feathered like a little bit in the center here. I think I want even less flow for this. I just kind of come in and add a little bit of that feathering in.
Yeah.
Just to give it a little bit more
Style and flavor.
Style and flavor. But yeah, it just gives it a little something different. But super easy, and it's that same concept of a layer mask. It's just another application. Layer masks are great, and most of the time when I'm designing, I will use a layer mask over deleting something. Because what's great about the layer mask, say I don't like this, I can just delete it, or I can disable it. Everything is still there. So a layer mask is entirely non-destructive. Whereas if I just used the eraser tool, all of that I just got rid of is now gone forever. And for me as a designer, if I make a mistake, I want to be able to go back. And with a layer mask, I can do that, even if I close this document and open it back up again. So, yeah, that's that. Pretty simple design.
Yeah.